Hi everyone, thank you for joining our April Broker Roundtable meeting. We have brokers Ken Moon and Jeff Green on the meeting with us this morning. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type those into the questions box so we will be able to see them. I will go ahead now and pass it over to Ken Moon. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, Shelley. Thanks. I'm sorry, Victoria. Good morning. Yeah, welcome everybody. Glad to have you here. Yet another broker roundtable, and we're here to go over some exciting things this morning. Actually, we're going to cover something that you hardly ever have happen, so that'll be fun. But our agenda is we're going to have some words from our good friends from Movement Mortgage. Then we're going to talk about something that never happens, of course, is cancellations. But maybe that's why we get so many questions, because nobody knows quite what to do when they finally have one. And we'll talk a little bit about multiple offers. We had a request from one of our agents who wanted to know about the multiple offer form. We'll talk about that, multiple counter offer form. And a little bit about how people, what happens with the earnest money deposits on cancellations. And then we'll have some Q&A. So, but first, our Allison James strategic partner from Movement Mortgage, senior mortgage advisor from San Diego, Shelley Hoisted. Take it away, Shelley.
Hi, Ken. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I've got just a couple of quick announcements. I try to keep these brief so you can spend more time with your brokers. A couple of things. I don't know if many of you have heard of Rate Plug, but Rate Plug is a service that's provided through the MLS directly. We're piloting it in the Sandacor area for now, and basically Movement Mortgage has sponsored it, so it's free of charge to Sandacor members. And whenever you share an MLS listing with a potential buyer, or seller for that matter, it has a live link in it that has live financing calculator in it. It has my information with some payment options so they can see it, and this helps keep the client in your listing longer than they might otherwise. So that's a nice service, and also it's an easy way for me to whip out flyers for you if you need them. It automatically pulls out the top 5 to 7 photos off of the MLS, and of course I can customize them based on the program that suits your property. So if it's a condo and it's not FHA approved, then we would stick with conventional financing options, etc. So that's a way to, I know some of the realtors are putting my flyer with financial information on the back of their flyer, so it just provides some additional information and payment options for the client. So that's Rate Plug. Look for an invite from me for those of you in Sandacor MLS, and that's what that's about. Secondly, on May 7th in Carlsbad, we are having a training with Ticor Title for the CFPB changes that are coming up on August 1st. And that is going to be live training in Carlsbad if you're local. The CFPB training is a very important thing for all of you to know about. We will be having a webinar on it nationally as well in July, and while it specifically affects escrow and lending the most as far as disclosures, there are things as a realtor you are absolutely going to want to know so that you can time your closings appropriately, because they may be affected. So that's May 7th, 9:30 in Carlsbad, and then look for the webinar invite that we'll have in July, I believe. The third thing that I wanted all of you to be aware of is that Movement Mortgage is a preferred or an approved lender with the down payment assistance programs. That does allow us to offer zero down financing. One of the programs is called the NHF Platinum program. It offers a 5% grant to the qualified home buyers. They do not have to repay it. It is not a second lien. It is just a 5% grant for their down payment and closing costs that can piggyback with an FHA or conventional loan, and it's a really slick program. It is not only for first-time home buyers as well, so that's good to know, but it is for owner-occupied only. The other program,
where's that money come from?
It comes from the National Home Buyers Fund. It's a bond fund. Yeah, it's a really, really slick. Hey, that was really cool. I'm not used to anybody actually responding to me when I talk on these things. Usually I'm just speaking out into the air, right?
Okay.
No, please, I encourage it. That was great. The other one is the CalHAFA program, which is from the California Housing Finance, I think, Administration and our agency. And it is a silent second that also is a down payment assistance. It does work as a silent second where the borrower pays it back at a future date. I think they have to stay in the home 10 years or something in order not to pay it back, but there's more specifics on that. The good one about that one is it does have a little bit higher income limits for the borrower than the Platinum program. So that's all I'm really going to say about those right now. We will set up a workshop where we can talk about the down payment assistance more specifically, or maybe do a webinar, because Movement Mortgage is approved on many what we call bond programs or down payment assistance programs across the country. And most of them we can underwrite in-house, so we get them approved and then we just send them to the agency for the last 48 hours to get their final stamp of approval. So we're still closing these in, less than 30 days. So I really encourage you, if you've got clients that say, yeah, I'm great, but I don't have my down payment yet, don't worry about that. Get in touch with me, and we'll see if they can get approved for one of these programs. So that's pretty exciting. Zero down financing is available at Movement Mortgage. Again, the basics are going to be that they have to fit under the maximum income qualification, which varies from county to county and depending on the program. So we'll have to look that up specifically for your client. But don't automatically turn someone away if you think down payment is the only issue that's keeping them from buying. So that's it from me. So I guess I'll turn it back to Ken.
Terrific. Thanks, Shelley. I did have one question about that. Is what sort of price range are we talking about in terms of these programs?
They will work alongside, like if it's an FHA, it would work along with the whatever the maximum loan amount is for the FHA in your area. If it's conventional, same would go. It's not going to work for jumbo.
But the income guidelines for those people, they're going to be probably more in the under 300,000 kind of range, or?
Well, one was the 115% of the median income, so it depends on the family size. So like if an individual is making $90,000 a year, he's probably making too much for one of these programs. But like if a couple's making $90,000, then they, I think, would fit in the Platinum program. But again, it depends on the area because it's based on the area's median income. So while you can go up to, say the $500,000 or the $417 loan amount, yes, it may be limited due to whatever the maximum income is for that particular area.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
but
great.
It's pretty slick for your, most people entering into the market as first-time home buyers or people that are in the, startup price range, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like a great program.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And so now we'll get into something that's near and dear to everybody's heart, is cancellations. Just kidding. There comes a time when cancellations happen, and this month we're going to look at it from the standpoint of the seller. There are quite a few things actually written into the contract that would allow a seller to cancel. These are contractual issues in the contract that give a seller the ability to cancel. The first one is if the buyer fails to remove contingencies. And we can talk a little bit about removing contingencies. One thing, we've talked about it before, but just it's good to repeat and reinforce, the way the contract's written today, unlike a few years ago, contingencies are not removed until they are removed in writing. So if the buyer doesn't remove it in writing and nobody sends them a notice to perform, they can skate through the whole transaction and cancel at the end if they want, because of one of those contingencies. It has to be in good faith, and anyway, there's some other issues, but just something to keep in mind. The second cancellation reason would be if the buyer fails to deposit earnest money, of course, or if the earnest money funds aren't good, or if they fail to provide a verification of their down payment funds, or if the seller disapproves of the verification. They send a verification and it's bogus, it's something written on a piece of yellow paper, then the seller would be well within his rights to disapprove of that and could cancel. Another one that's kind of, I think people miss, is that if the buyer fails to return the required disclosures, if they fail to sign that they've accepted or acknowledge receipt of a copy of these disclosures, the TDS, the hazard disclosure, lead paint disclosure, the things that are required in the contract, the seller can cancel. If the buyer fails to sign a separate liquidated damages agreement on any additional deposits in escrow. In other words, sometimes they'll have an initial earnest money and then they have to increase that earnest money deposit at a particular time, but they need to also sign a separate liquidated damages agreement on that. If the buyer fails to deliver notice of FHA costs or terms, that also could be a thing that could cause it to cancel. There can be other things that are not in the contract. You can have other contingencies like a short sale addendum or a condition, a purchase addendum where the COP where the seller can cancel because they haven't been able to find another property or that sort of thing. So other contingencies can be in there for cancellations. You also could have a cancellation just by mutual agreement. If they both agreed they want to cancel, then that's fine, and that makes it pretty easy. Or other things like fraud, mistakes, duress, something illegal. Those are other things that might cause a cancellation to happen. But when those things happen and you want to get out of, the seller wants to get out of the contract, it's best to consult with an attorney. And that's straight from Car Legal. They say it's best to get an attorney if you're going to be canceling based on those kinds of causes. Excuse me. So what do we do if we have a cancellation? How do we go through it? Well, it's a series of 6 steps. And you want to make sure that you get every one of these done correctly, or you can have problems. And we'll go through them step by step. And of course, if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to kick them in. And Victoria, if you get questions during this, feel free to interrupt me so we can do them when they're timely, because this information is really important for people to go through properly.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, sure. Step 1 is you have to see if you have to check the time frame to see whether the buyer's performed. This is particularly in the case of inspections and contingencies. And so it's very important that we know exactly what the time frame is. A lot of times it seems like agents have kind of a fuzzy idea of when the 17 days are up. And part of that is you may have been wondering lately about why we've been such sticklers on dates on signatures and dates on forms and things like that. Why are they being so picky? Well, this is the reason right here. The date of acceptance is the date that the final offer or final counteroffer is agreed to in writing and then delivered back and personally received by the other party. Now, those dates, how do we figure out what that date is? Well, here's an example. If a buyer makes an offer on Monday, the seller signs it on Tuesday, and then delivers it back to the buyer's agent on Wednesday. Wednesday is the date of acceptance, and Thursday is day one of the agreement. So you would add 17 days to Wednesday to get to the contingency period end. And if we'll talk about that falling on a weekend and that sort of thing, but you always count the date that its acceptance is delivered back, personally received by the other party. That is day 0. Then the next day is day 1. So that's how it works.
Hey, Ken.
Yes, sir.
Jeff Green here. Yeah, I just wanted to point out this is another reason why we're sticklers on confirmation of acceptance. You can have a binding agreement without the initial confirmation, but it's just really not good real estate. It's not a good practice. It makes it clear when that's initialed, and it's just a good thing to do.
Yeah, and it also confirms what the date is of when the contract actually started, which is critical if you get into some kind of an argument over whether they need to remove contingencies. So yeah, that's a good point. When you're counting days, by the way, we're talking about counting to see the 17 days for contingencies or lots of other things. You always count Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. And I'm having a heck of a time getting this display to go away, but so I can't read underneath this thing. Anyway, if that date's is, I'll just go through it because you always count Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, and to get to the final date. So if that date is a Saturday or a Sunday or a holiday, it's due the next day. An example would be if we had suppose somebody the 17 days ends up on a Saturday. Well, and it's on Labor Day weekend. Well, then they don't have to remove contingencies until the following Tuesday. So it's actually 20 days, not 17. So step 2 is you have to make sure that the seller has fulfilled all their obligations. And this is really important. Did they deliver all their disclosures within 7 days? If they haven't, the buyer has 5 days after the receipt of any late disclosures. So, for example, if they didn't get their lead-based paint disclosure until 15 days into it, they have until 20 days to cancel or to remove contingencies. Did the seller make the property available for inspections and investigations? If they didn't, they can't require them to remove contingencies. They have to make sure that they fulfilled all their obligations. One thing, a lot of times people think that if there's been an agreement on a request for repairs, that the repairs have to be completed before the buyer has to remove contingencies. That's not the case. It's been held in many lawsuits that is not the case. The repairs need to be completed before the final walkthrough but they don't have to be completed to remove contingencies. So you can send a notice to perform on those. Step 3.
Hey, Ken.
Yes.
One thing I was going to mention is that if the repairs are required for the loan, such as they're called out by the appraiser or it's an FHA or VA condition, then it would technically become a lending contingency and may then have to be done prior to lending contingency being removed. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible. But, you know, a lot of times things that have to be repaired might be lending contingencies also. Other things, you know, like they have to supply a stove, or, you know, they have to fix a window or something, which might be required. But that doesn't necessarily have to be done before they remove contingencies, because they've agreed to do it, so it becomes part of the contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So from a lender's perspective, a lot of times, you know, agents will ask me, well, are we approved? Can I remove contingencies? Well, yes, you're pretty much always approved, but it's still conditioned on, you know, some of these other things. So it's
Yeah. Well, they
not
can,
final.
and they can selectively remove contingencies. They can remove everything except the loan contingency too at that point.
Right. Right.
In other words, to clarify, the repair then becomes a contingency of the loan. It's not a contingency of property condition at that point or inspection. So it's deemed normal at that point for the seller to say, look, you know, you've already done all your inspections. You're not inspecting the repair work. Now that's a contingency of the loan, and it's part of the conditions that the lender has. So that just because sometimes there's an argument over that. People say, well, I'm not releasing my inspection contingencies, and the seller says, yes, you are. You can release everything except the loan. So that moves the location of that contingency over to a loan contingency at that point.
Yeah, that's
Right.
a good way to sum it up.
Yep.
Okay, and the way we enforce any of these things, if the buyer has not performed on any of these issues, is we provide them either with a notice to the buyer to perform, an NBP, or a demand to close escrow. In other words, if they're late closing escrow, we'd give them a DCE if they haven't done their inspections or haven't returned their disclosures, their signed disclosures. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who've been trying to get signed disclosures back from buyer's agents. You can send them a notice to perform. They have to do it. Anyway, that notice to perform must be correctly filled out, and it has to say exactly what the buyer must do, and the seller must sign it. You do not use a CR form. Sometimes agents will send a contingency release form and say, you've got to sign this. Well, that's not a formal demand. It's not good practice. You need to use the notice to the buyer to perform. And make sure you check the correct boxes. Specify exactly what's being demanded, and it's really important because the courts have held that if you don't complete the form correctly, the whole exercise is pointless and defective. It doesn't hold water. So make sure you fill it out correctly and check the right boxes. The seller has to sign, otherwise it's worthless. So step 4, you have to deliver the notice to perform or demand to close. It has to be personally received by the buyer's agent or by the buyer, and that's kind of an interesting thing as well. It's amazing how often people leave off the block on the last page of the RPA that says when it talks about when the RPA expires and to whom the response must be sent. Make sure you always put your name, as an agent, make sure you always put your name in there so that you can receive the response. Otherwise, it'll go direct to the seller or to the buyer, because nobody else is authorized to receive it. So anyway, let's say we've delivered this to the buyer's agent. We need to get some kind of verification that it was in fact received. An irate email saying, "Why'd you send me this?" is just fine. That covers you. If you can send it via email, mail, fax, messenger, any way you want. But if the agent's name isn't filled in on that last page, it has to go to the buyer. Otherwise, it can go to the agent. Any response at all, a text message, anything constitutes evidence of receipt. And what's kind of interesting, when I was doing research on this, they said if you can't get any response from them, if you send via email, mail, and text 3 days in a row and document that, the courts will hold that you've delivered it. The other side would have a hard time convincing people that you did not.
And may I point out, the best place to store that documentation is in your SkySlope conversation log.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. So step 5, count the days. This is where we get into talking about when things are effective. The notice, a notice to the buyer to perform, cannot be given more than 2 days before the due date. Even if you've adjusted the notice to perform and in the contract and said it's going to be 3 days notice, you cannot give it more than 2 days before the due date. So let's say the contingencies need to be removed on the 30th, which is tomorrow. If you want to make sure that that happens on the 30th, you would deliver the notice to the buyer to perform on the 28th, which these are all weekdays. And that means that they have until the 30th at 11:59 p.m. to get it done. The first day of receipt, which would be yesterday when they deliver it, that's day 0, no matter what time. If you delivered it yesterday at 11 o'clock in the evening, it's fine. It's still yesterday. That's day 0, no matter what time. Okay, so then you count 1, 2. The next day is day 1. Next day is day 2. They have all day until 11:59 at night. And the next day is the day that you can cancel. But if day 2 is a weekend or a holiday, then day 2 becomes the next business day. And cancellation is the day after that. So using that same example, let's move it up a couple of days. Let's say today is Wednesday. Let's say we give them the notice tomorrow. We give them a notice to the buyer to perform because their 17 days is up on Saturday. So we give them a notice tomorrow. Tomorrow is day 0. Then Friday would be day 1. And then Saturday would be day 2. Well, if Saturday is day 2, they can't, that due date cannot fall on a weekend or a holiday. So that day 2 becomes Monday. Unless that's a holiday, then day 2 would become Tuesday. So day 2 becomes Monday. They have all day on Monday to get it done. If they don't get it done by 11:59 on Monday, then you can cancel on Tuesday. Hope that makes sense to everybody. And then step 6, the day after the last day to perform, you then have the seller sign and you deliver a cancellation form using cancellation of contract form CC. And I'm going to switch over to zip forms here for the cancellation form because it's really important that we put the right stuff in there. So we're going to switch over. Wrong one. Okay, they timed me out.
While you're doing that, Ken, I don't know how long it'll take, but just want to point out one of the words you're going to hear from us as brokers is the phrase courtroom ready documents, which has to do with everything being signed and dated, and important to note, legible. Sometimes we see something that's not very dark, and the reason we ask for it to be redone is because if we go to court, which we have done, we don't like to do it, but we do, and we have to print these out. So they have to be printable, not just viewable on a computer, because we can't bring a computer screen or an iPad and stick it in front of a judge. So just food for thought, just be thinking of the term courtroom-ready document and what that means to you if you stand before a judge and what it means to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a cancellation of contract and release of deposit, cancellation of escrow. And everybody knows how to fill in the top part. What we're talking about is a seller cancellation. And this text right here, paragraphs 1 and 2 constitute escrow instructions, requires mutually signed release instructions from buyer and seller, a judicial decision, or arbitration award. And a party can be subject to a civil penalty of up to $1,000 for refusal to sign these instructions if no good faith dispute exists. Yet sometimes you'll have a buyer will drag their feet because they don't want to cancel, they don't want to agree to the cancellation, they're afraid they're going to lose their deposit, and they just need to be aware that they can be liable for up to $1,000. So anyway, the check boxes here, these first 3 are typically used. The first one is used either by the buyer or the seller, but the second one, B here, is if they haven't removed contingencies, you need to check box B. If they haven't taken a particular contractual action that they're supposed to do, like return documents or do things that they've agreed to do, then you check box C. If you gave them a demand to close escrow, you check other down here and type in buyer failed to close escrow after being given demand to close. And then the seller signs this, and then down here you also have to fill in section 2, the escrow number, the name of the escrow company, and whatever you've agreed to in terms of the liquidated damages or deposits. So it's pretty clear, but very important that it gets filled out correctly. And while we're talking about deposits, one of the questions that comes up is obviously the seller is going to be a little put out if the buyer hasn't removed contingencies. They've held the property up, kept it off the market for almost 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, and he's got nothing to show for it. And a lot of times they think they should be able to keep the deposit. Well, if the seller cancels because of failure to remove contingencies, that sort of thing, you cannot keep the deposit. You just can't do it. So make sure you cancel your seller to that effect. Um, if it's after contingencies have been removed, the answer is maybe they can keep it. And this kind of goes to how motivated the seller is to get the property sold, how difficult the buyer is. If it's still in escrow, you really can't sell it unless you get an attorney involved. There is a way to do it, but you need an attorney to sell it if the other escrow has not been canceled. You're always well advised, if you're going to make the listing active again, put it back on the market, you're well advised to make it subject to cancellation of the prior escrow. That way you don't get involved where you have to sell the property to two different people, which is kind of nice not to have happen. And if you want to sell the property to somebody else, a lot of times the seller says, gosh darn it, I should get that deposit, but you know what, if it means giving up the deposit, let the buyer have his deposit back, you can put it back on the market and sell it and move on with your life. Sometimes it's easier. So
I wanted to also point out something too, that sometimes there's especially with the client, there's a misunderstanding of the difference between an escrow and the contract. While escrow may be open and they didn't cancel the escrow, there may be reasons why the contract is canceled, and that's probably something for another time, but just make sure that there's a clear understanding between the two. Sometimes you cancel the escrow and the contract simultaneously, but sometimes the escrow remains open at the escrow company.
yeah, because nobody's agreed to what's going to happen with the money usually, or one party or the other fails to sign the cancellation. So that's about it on seller's cancellations. We'll go over the buyer side of it on another webinar, so we don't keep everybody listening to me drone on for too long. And let's talk a little bit about multiple offers, and let's go look at that form. The multiple counteroffer form, when you get multiple offers as the listing agent, and you want to make a counteroffer, this is the form to use. It's the SMCO form, seller multiple counteroffer, and we'd put a number here and enter the information, and then whatever terms you want in here. And this is where it gets interesting down here. There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen. You see all these ands along here? That means every one of those things has to happen, or nobody will have, or the buyer and seller shall have no duties or obligations for the purchase or sale of the property. So, and make sure you put the date and time that this expires, if you're going to have something other than the third day, and make sure you put the agent's name here, that you're authorized to receive it. Okay? And let's talk about this, how this differs from a regular counteroffer. Okay? A regular counteroffer goes back to the buyer, from the seller, goes back to the buyer. Buyer agrees to it, signs it, sends it back. As soon as it's received by the seller or his or her agent, you got a deal. Not the case with a multiple counteroffer. With a multiple counteroffer, it becomes a transaction when all of the following occur. The buyer has signed the counteroffer. A copy of the counteroffer signed by the buyer is personally received by the seller or the agent who's authorized to receive it. Then, and after the buyer signs, in paragraph 4, Here's paragraph 4 down here. Buyer accepts a multiple counteroffer, etc. After the buyer has signed, it all comes back. Then the seller has to sign it in paragraph 5. Down here, the seller's agent then delivers it back to the buyer or the buyer's agent. Then it's a deal. As soon as we know that that's been delivered back to the buyer's agent, it's a deal. Anytime prior to that, it's not a deal. So if you have put out a multiple counter and you get another offer from somebody and you think, gee, this is a better offer, is it okay for me to take it? Yes, you can take it. It's not a deal until the seller accepts the buyer's response, if they accept it. And it's up to the seller whether they want to accept it or not. Now, brings up another form, the WOO form, withdrawal of offer. If the seller withdraws this anytime prior to acceptance, you can use this CAR WOO form, which is a withdrawal of offer, and that terminates it. That, by the way, is a very useful form if you have a situation where somebody has made just a regular counteroffer. If the seller has made a regular counteroffer to one buyer, they have not responded yet, and you get a better offer, then you need to very quickly use a withdrawal of offer form to send to the agent where you sent the counteroffer and tell them that you've withdrawn your counteroffer. Otherwise, while you're negotiating with this better buyer, you may get an acceptance from the first counter, and you're in escrow already. So this is all a little bit complicated. If anybody has any questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about it. But the basics are right here. These first two items right here, right here are, well, that didn't work very well. These first two items are all that are required for a regular counteroffer. Okay? Counteroffer goes to the buyer signs it, and it's received by the seller or seller's agent. With a multiple counteroffer, the buyer signs in paragraph 4, then the seller, it sends it back to the seller signs in paragraph 5, and then the seller's signed acceptance is sent back and delivered to the buyer or the buyer's agent. So there are these extra steps for a multiple counteroffer. I hope that clears it up.
Ken, I have a question here for you. I'm not sure if you would like to answer it now.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Seller accepts contingent offer based upon buyer specifically having an offer in hand and opening escrow on their property. Buyer's offer falls through on day 1 and escrow is not opened on either property. So the buyer did not initially meet the requirements of the COP and buyer's agent won't respond to the NTP. Is this even a legal contract since the buyer did not initially perform?
Okay, let's go back and step through that again.
It's a long one.
Yeah. Okay, give me the first phrase there.
Okay, seller accepts contingent offer based upon buyer specifically having an offer in hand and opening escrow on their property.
Okay. Seller accepts a contingent offer. I assume that's contingent on the buyers being able to sell their own property. That's probably what we're talking about, which would be with a COP form. Mm-hmm. And it's contingent on their having an offer from somebody else already for their house.
I believe so.
And then that offer falls through, they, if that's the case, then it sounds like farther on they're saying that that the other agent now won't respond to them.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say you don't have anything if you didn't receive a deposit and you didn't you may technically I don't know if the seller signed it and the seller and it's been delivered back to the buyer as an accepted contract, or if there were any counters. If it's been delivered back as an accepted agreement, but you've had only communication that the offer fell through, that it was contingent upon, I would think you'd want to send a cancellation of contract, not a cancellation of escrow, but a cancellation of contract, just to make sure that everybody's aware that it's canceled. Mm-hmm. If both sides have accepted the agreement, then you have an agreement, technically. The buyer can certainly cancel based on the contingency that they have, but just to clean it up, I would certainly do a cancellation to make sure that there's nobody coming out of the woodwork later on when you go to sell it.
Yeah. He had said here, yes, it was accepted, but based upon the buyer's home being in escrow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if that's not the case, then you'd probably want to do a cancellation just to clear it up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
That is it for right now. I'll
Okay.
let you know if anything else comes up.
Okay. Couple things for everybody not to forget. Have you been reading the broker's update? If you have, you may have noticed that there's an opportunity for you to avoid playing phone tag with your broker. I'm usually pretty available on the phone, but sometimes I'm in meetings and things. And if you want to make sure that you can schedule your time and my time more effectively, there's a function called appointee.com, which was pioneered by our friend Jeff Green. And if you want to make an appointment with me, you go to kenmoon.appointee.com, and you'll see blocks of time in there. You can just click on it, and you can schedule a time, and we'll have a little conference and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So we're just trying to make it easy for everybody to schedule their time and make sure that you can get information when you need it. And Jeff Green's is at jeffgreen.appointee.com. And for more information, of course, be sure to remember faqs.allisonjames.info. And if it's not there, fill in your question, and then you can get a hold of us either through an appointment or through email, or give us a call, and we're happy to help. Anybody else have any other questions about anything we've covered today?
No, we don't have anything yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, these are general information sources that that I put up every month. For future events, next month we're going to be having everything you always wanted to know about commissions, but we're afraid to ask. Procuring cause, conditional offers of compensation, very interesting stuff. That'll be on May 27th at 10 a.m. And please read the broker updates and your emails. It really, really helps if you guys read your emails and so you know what's going on and things don't come as a surprise. And tell any other agents you know, because you refer them, you can make some money, and you can eliminate all your fees, and that's a good thing. So if nobody has anything else, that's it for this month, and hope everybody's having a great business out there. It seems like things are really heating up. Anything else from you, Jeff? No, Jeff's heating up with business of his own. So,
No, that
okay.
covers it. I'm sorry, I was having a little trouble unclicking my mute. So, no, everything's good, and best wishes to all of you.
Okay, everybody have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.